Hey guys, Ken Smith Fishing. So this is a follow-up to the first video we did where we talked about lithium batteries slowing boats down. And yes, the title was a little bit clickbait, but it sparked a lot of good conversation. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of guys, and I had no idea, a lot of guys have experienced this issue. And what's happening is they're pulling the weight out of the back of that boat and they're getting their boat out of balance. So they've lost, the nose is getting heavy, they can't get the nose up, they're having to change props, change settings, put wedges in their behind their transoms to get more trim out of the boat. And if you're doing any of that stuff, you're still using energy from the motor to do something other than propel you forward. So I've had a lot of really good conversations with guys who have monkeyed with this on their own and also some industry experts. I'm going to share with y'all today kind of what we found out on maybe some solutions to this, and also to clarify a little bit a misconception. So let's jump right in. And by the way, so the first video, you remember this was sort of our center of gravity or center of balance or whatever you want to call it. But on the seesaw, the middle there, and so I kind of corrected it up for our purposes. And I said, all right, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to make a seesaw that makes sense to bass fishermen. So here we have two 500-pound motors on a 20-foot long seesaw with a fulcrum or a center point there. And if the weight and the distance equal each other, then you're going to have balance, right? And that's really what you're trying to get in a bass boat. You want balance, not necessarily just sitting in the water, but when you're running, you don't want to have to add trim tabs or a longer tube or flare to the tube to get transom lift, nor do you want to over trim to get bow lift. You want to have good balance to get as much of the energy the motor produces propelling you forward versus propelling you up or down, right? Back of the motor up, front of the motor down, back of the boat up, stern up, bow down, or stern down, bow up. So the misconception guys had, and granted a little bit was because of the title, was that removing weight from your boat slows you down. In fact, removing weight from your boat should speed you up unless it does what's happening to a lot of guys, which is it throws them out of balance. Now let's kind of cover the misconception here. So, and the difference is weight versus force. So if you have, for example, here a 50-pound bag sitting right in the middle of your balance beam, right on the fulcrum point, well then that is just straight weight, right? That's a real simple concept. But if you move that 50-pound, in this case we moved it 5 feet out to the left of the fulcrum point, now versus weight it becomes force. And I think this will make a lot more sense for you here in just a second. So specifically what it's called is pounds force. And by the way, anyway, so as we move that weight away from our center point, away from our center of gravity or our fulcrum, if you want to call it that, the weight now changes characteristics, I'm going to say. It no longer is considered weight, you're going to consider it force. And in this case, the measurement of that, the force measurement is something called, or what you measured it in is pounds foot. And by the way, I'm going to screw that up. I'm going to call it pounds feet in here, but it's really called pounds foot. For some reason, I can't get pounds feet out of my head. So in this case, if we move that 50-pound bag from the center of gravity out 5 feet on that 10-foot board, if you will, then we now have 50 pounds times 5 feet or 250 pound-foot of force out there off that fulcrum point. Now, by the way, I got to give credit where credit is due here. So a friend of mine is Walton. Walton and I have become acquainted because of my videos, which he started following the videos. He reached out on something, and we've become buddies. He is an engineer and a pilot, so he gets balance way better than most of us do because and we talked about this, I never thought about when we were flying on a small jet, or not jet, but like a four-seater Cessna or whatever you want to call one of those fixed-wing aircraft once. And the pilot said, "What do you weigh?" And I'm like, it kind of freaked me out. And Walton said, well, he did that because he knows where the center of balance is on that airplane, and he needs to seat people and luggage and golf clubs or whatever else goes on there in a place where he doesn't get his airplane out of balance, or the plane won't perform or won't fly right. So thank you, Walton, for helping me with this. And by the way, you'll see him comment on my videos quite often. He is Text Man on my videos. So thank you for Text Man. That's a picture of him from many, many years ago holding up a nice one. So Walton and I started talking about this, and we were talking about trying to figure out where the center of gravity was on a bass boat. So we did a little bit of research. So my Bass Cat Lynx weighs 2,150 pounds, just a dry hull, if you will. And then we started kind of adding what would be tournament load to that, or I did. And I didn't count tackle because I didn't have a good way to measure it. And truthfully, tackle's probably not that heavy, more than maybe 100 pounds of tackle at any given time. Some of you guys might say you carry more than that, but rods, reels, everything's probably less than 100 pounds. So the vast majority of the boat is the hull. It's the motor. Now, a Mercury Pro XS 250 weighs 511 pounds dry. And I get trolling motor and everything else, but big weight. You know, my boat has a 60-gallon fuel capacity. I've never filled it up. So probably to start the day on a tournament at Raven or Toledo Bend, I'm going to have 40 gallons of fuel in the boat. That's about what I'm going to have. I'm going to have one side basically full at 30 gallons, and I carry 10 gallons on the other side to get me home. So 40 gallons times, so a gallon of gas weighs about 6 pounds, so that's about 240 pounds. And then a live well, once it's full, the live well's 40-ish gallons in a Bass Cat. So water weighs about 8.4 pounds per gallon, so about 336 pounds. So tournament load, roughly, and granted I understand it's different, is probably 3,200 pounds. Now, the one thing I don't think was taken into this equation was batteries, because when I looked at Bass Cat, it just said dry hull weight. So I think you could probably add another 300 pounds-ish of batteries back there. So 3,500 pounds sort of right out of the box before you add dudes or anything else. And by the way, there's a reason we sit where we do. And there's also a reason why live wells and a lot of boats have moved the gas tanks as close as they can to the seats. It's because the more you can put that weight close to that center of gravity, the less impact it has on performance of the boat. Walton says they do the same thing on an airplane, by the way. So we were trying to figure out about where the center of gravity on a boat would be, and we guessed it to be around where we sit, because that seems to make sense. If you're going to have 400 pounds of guys, let's just say, you want to put them pretty much right on that center of gravity, so you don't really change the balance of a boat. And you know what? One day it might be me at 195 pounds. Another day it might be me and a 300-pound guy in there. We got 500 pounds sitting there. So that's probably where you vary the weight as much as anywhere in a boat. So you'd want to put it right on the center of balance. So we estimated it would be about in the driver's seat. So I thought, now I'm the guy who doesn't know much, but I know a guy, right? I called Rick Pierce and I said, hey, Rick, where would the center of gravity be on a bass boat? And he said, he's watched my videos. He started chuckling. He goes, where do you think it is? And I said, I think it's where we sit. And he goes, it's a little different in every one of our boats, but that's a really good estimate. It's going to be about where we sit. So my boat's at storage. It's several miles away. Walton's boat's in his garage. I said, Walton, go out and measure your boat and see how far it is from the transom to the center of the driver's seat. His boat's a Ranger 521. That boat's 21 feet, 3 inches long. He said it's roughly 80 inches. Actually, he didn't. He's an engineer. He said it is 80 inches from the transom to the center of the seat of the driver's seat. So that's about 6.5 feet, give or take a couple of inches. That means 70% of the boat's in front of the center of gravity and 30% in the back of the center of gravity. And we needed that information to do some math. And you don't want me doing math, because if you get me doing math, this is kind of what's going to happen. So I went back to Walton and I said, hey, help me with the math on this. And he said, actually, this is a calculation as a pilot you have to run all the time. Exactly what we talked about, where people seat, where you put whatever cargo you're carrying. You got to know that in an airplane. He said, this is actually pretty simple stuff to figure out. So we went back to the conversation of swapping out AGMs or wet cells or whatever you want to call them for lithium batteries. And I had a viewer, as I talked about in the first video, who said he had done that, and he had actually weighed everything as he did it. He weighed his batteries as he pulled them out. He weighed his big, I think he had them in code of precision charger. He weighed the lithiums he put in, and then he put a NOCO charger in. And he said it was a 170-pound swing down. He lost 170 pounds of weight. And most battery compartments are 6 inches to 2 feet in front of the transom. So we just picked a foot as kind of the center line. If you think about that, kind of how those batteries stack up. So we're able to do that math now. If we have 170 pounds we've removed 5.5 feet behind the center of gravity, that means we have 170 times 5.5 feet. We've moved 930 pound foot of force from the back of the boat. Now that was really a concept that I was struggling with, so I thought, well, I'll just reverse it and I'll say, well, do it the other way. If you want to add 935 pounds of force, pound-foot of force to the front deck, you just put a big fat Labrador Retriever 10 feet in front of the center of gravity. Or you can put a little bird dog, a little 64-pound bird dog, right at the front of the boat. And that's what it would take to counteract that 170 pounds. So you wouldn't have to put 170 pounds in the front of the boat. You'd have to put some amount of weight somewhere in front of that fulcrum, somewhere on the other side. Now you can start thinking about what it takes when you subtract weight or add weight to the front of the back to get that boat back in balance. And as Walt and I talked about it, I said, gosh, you think about it. So I went and looked. A big Garmin graph, a 12-inch Garmin graph, and a Hummingbird's about the same, and I'm sure Lowrance are pretty similar, are about 6 pounds a piece. And you think, yeah, that's not much weight. Well, I got 3 of them up there. And I started thinking, when they probably originally engineered these boats, because most of these boats that are being manufactured today, the design of them has been around for years. They've not made drastic changes to the design of boats or the weight distribution of boats. They were probably thinking there was going to be 1 graph on the front deck or 2 9-inch graphs. I mean, that's how most of them even set them up when you go to buy a package boat, a Skeeter package boat, a Ranger package boat, a Bass Cat package boat, a Nitro package boat. They got 2 9-inch graphs. So if you add 2, let's just say 3 12-inch graphs to the front of that boat that the manufacturer didn't anticipate you were going to add, that's 6, 12, 18 pounds times 13 feet, because they're way up on the bow of the boat. You just added 234 pounds of, get it right, 234 pound-foot of force right on the bow of that boat. And then I looked up the right height turret, because again, it's way to the front of the boat. It's a 14-pound addition. That's 182 pound-foot force. A Humminbird 360 transducer, 12 pounds. Now, it's not 14.5 feet. You think about that, well, when it's deployed, it is, but you don't care as much about it's deployed. You want to think about when it's stowed and you're running. And when it's stowed and you're running, I estimated it's probably in a 21-foot boat, 13 feet in front of the center of gravity. 13 times 14 is 182 pound-foot of force you're adding to the nose of that boat. And all of that, you take all that stuff on the front, you take all that stuff off the back, you're adding 230. Let's just say you only have one of those. Let's just say you have the graphs, and maybe you only have 2 additional graphs above what the manufacturer's bought. So you have so let's say you add 160 pound-foot of force with 2 extra graphs. You add 160-ish roughly with a Humminbird, and then you pull 935 out of the back. You can see you're really starting to throw that boat out of balance for the way they originally intended for you to run that boat. Now, one of the ways we correct it a lot, and I would love to know the answer to this from boat manufacturers, is, we talked about it in the first video with Champions, when you start adding power poles. So power poles are light, but where they go makes them have a lot of pound-foot of force. So an 8-foot power pole is 23 pounds, times 2 is 46 pounds, times 6.5 feet is 399 pound-foot of force way on the back of that boat, because it's right on the transom. So power poles might actually help some guys. Now you got wind resistance that starts to add to that, but most of us are running power poles, so you got to take that into your equation as well. And then one of the things we talked about in the first video was maybe moving your motor back some. But as we started, as we started to understand, as I started to understand the math better, it's really hard to make much impact because you're moving a 500-pound motor. Let's say if you could move it back a full foot. So if it was on a if it was against the transom and you put a 12-inch setback on it, yeah, you just move 500-pound force to the back, further back on the back. Because remember, you don't do it the 6.5 plus the foot. It's just one extra foot that you're changing that weight on that boat because the boat was designed with a certain setback and jack plate on there. So anything you move back from there is where you're making a change to the balance. So even if that was the case, you're only getting 500-pound foot of force, which doesn't come anywhere near changing that 900+ pound foot of force you've removed from those lithium batteries from the back of the boat. And if you think about it, if you're only moving it an inch or two, if you're putting spacers or you've already got a 10-inch jack plate and you want to go to a 12-inch, you're only moving about 41 pounds. That's so hard for me to articulate. 41-pound foot of force per inch you move that motor back. So maybe that's not the best solution. One of the best solutions continues to be, as we've talked about, moving gear to the back of the boat. And I talked to one of the prop guys here because I was curious about something else I'll talk about in a minute. And by the way, I'm not going to say who this is because it was just a guy who picked up the phone at a prop shop. It's a really well-known, really well-respected prop shop. But I don't know if I was talking to a 16-year-old guy who answered the phone or the guy who knows everything about props. But one of the things he said when he's seeing this problem regularly is he tells the guys, get your tackle to the back of the boat. If you carry tools, get tools to the back of the boat. He runs a bullet. He said he actually runs lead shot in the very transom back of the hull because putting it all the way in the back of that hull is the way he can add the least weight to get the most pound foot of force. And that makes perfect sense, right? So move your gear back. One of the other things you might consider, and I've had a lot of conversations about this with guys about props, is you might consider a different prop. Now, remember two things from our prop conversations with Nick from Mercury Racing. And so that is an up close look at a tube and the flare. So a long tube, what you think about is where the back of that blade ends and where the end of the tube ends, that's the space. And this one is a Fury. It's a pretty long tube, and then you see it's got that flare at the end. The longer tube and the flare both add lift to the transom. They both add lift to the stern of the boat. If you lift the stern of the boat, you're pushing the bow of the boat down. So one of the things you might consider doing is going to something like the Bravo XS. And you see in that picture of the Bravo how much tiny bit of space. And I think XS means extra short, but I'm not sure that's the case. But they've shortened the tube up on that Bravo so that you don't get that transom lift. It lets that motor settle more, gives you better grip, and allows you to run the boat flatter and go faster if you're having issues like this. The only problem with the XS is it's a 4-blade prop, so you get more lift out of a 4-blade than you get out of a 3-blade. The reason I called the prop shop, I called two of them, was to see if they ever cut tubes down on props. The first one I called said, no, I've never even heard of that, which I thought was strange. The second prop shop that I called says, yeah, we do it all the time, but you need to really be careful with them because when you start, and I don't understand the hydrodynamics of this about a prop. He said, if you cut them too short, you can really start having steering issues and grip issues on that prop because you get, and again, something I don't understand, but you get fumes from the exhaust rolling backwards over that prop. So you really got to have a guy who knows what he's talking about. That idea of having somebody cut that prop down scares me, but I think there's probably props in the marketplace you can find that are designed to give you, and that's what you want to ask them is, I want less stern lift, right? I want something that pushes me forward, doesn't lift my stern up. So that's that Bravo Fury prop. I really think the solutions to this are think about where you can move ballast. And somebody said that, actually, Walton said that to me, I think. No, I believe it was the prop guy who said that to me. He said, you got to think about everything you carry in a boat as ballast. And I like that idea, right? My rods, the weight of those rods are ballast on the front of my boat. My graphs, my trolling motor, my batteries, everything's ballast. And you want to shift that weight around. Now that you kind of understand, measure how far it is from the transom to the center of your seat. You now know where that center of balance is, and you can start thinking about if you move 100 pounds 2 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet back, how much that's going to change what you've changed by adding or subtracting weight to the bow or the stern of the boat. So I'm glad to continue talking to you guys to try to help you work this out. As you guys probably, I don't know that I've talked about this. I talked to a lithium battery company last year, and I made the decision not to change to lithiums. I still may change my mind on that. I would like to have the additional hours that you can get off of the lithium battery. But gosh, my boat is so perfectly in balance and is so friggin' fast for a 20+ foot boat. I really don't want to screw something up and have to start going through these calculations. But it may be something I'll do in the future. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please give me a like. Please share the video. Please subscribe to the channel if you don't. I continue to have a lot of viewers that don't subscribe, and I appreciate it if you would to help me grow the channel and continue bringing you content like this. So more stuff coming for you later in the week. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll talk on the water real soon, guys. Thanks.